When we pick up an ancient text like the Bible, we kind of think we know what all the big words mean, words like holy or atonement. But what if our modern ideas are just completely off? What if the whole ancient blueprint for sacred space wasn't about morality at all, but about how to handle being close to an immense and honestly a dangerous power? So let's just start with this one huge question. We're all taught that holy means morally perfect, right? But what if, for the people who actually wrote these texts, it meant something way more fundamental and maybe even a little scary? Getting our heads around that question is the key to unlocking their entire worldview. See, we tend to read everything through our modern lens, which is all about sin and morality and breaking the law. But the ancient worldview, the world these texts were born in, was obsessed with a totally different set of problems. They were worried about the real danger of getting too close to God and the absolute necessity of keeping the cosmos in order.
Okay, to really get this, I want you to try an analogy. Stop thinking of the ancient temple like a church and start thinking of it like a divine nuclear reactor. Seriously. It wasn't just a quiet place for prayer. It was seen as the literal dwelling place of God, a hotspot of pure, raw, divine energy. It was amazing, for sure, but it was also hazardous. It was a place that demanded protocols, safety gear, and extreme caution.
All right, so let's dive into our first big idea here. To understand sacred space, we've got to step inside the ancient imagination. We have to see the cosmos the way they did, as a fragile, ordered system buzzing with unseen forces that you had to navigate very carefully. So what even is sacred space? Well, put simply, it's a point of intersection, a physical spot where heaven and earth literally overlap. But this isn't just some peaceful meeting point. It's a zone of incredible power. Think of it like a massive high-voltage transformer. It's super useful, but you do not just wander into it unprepared. And this is where we have to totally rewire our brains about the word holiness. In this ancient context, holy doesn't mean good. It means other. It's a word that describes something that belongs to God's realm. It's separate, it's distinct, and it plays by a whole different set of rules. A cup could be holy. A piece of land could be holy. It's a status, not a moral report card. Okay, so if holiness is a status, then purity is your state of readiness. Being pure just meant you were in the right condition to safely enter that high-voltage zone of sacred space. It had almost nothing to do with being sinless and everything to do with being ritually prepared.
So it makes sense, right? If you've got a divine nuclear reactor sitting in the middle of your city, you're going to need an operations manual. And that's pretty much what all those purity laws in the Bible were, a spiritual safety manual, a practical guide for how to live and interact in a world where God's presence was right there.
You can basically map this all out on two different scales. There's holy versus common. So set apart for God versus just ordinary. And then there's pure versus impure. So for example, the high priest, he was both holy and pure. But if he touched a dead body, he'd become holy but impure, which was a really dangerous combination. Most people were just common and pure, living their lives. And someone, say a woman after childbirth, was common and impure and just had to stay away from the temple for a little. Now, this is probably the most important part to get. The things that made a person impure weren't sins. Not at all. They were tied to the realities of life and death. Birth, disease, decay, touching a corpse. These are normal, natural parts of being human. Impurity wasn't a moral failure. It was just a temporary state of being out of sync with the perfect, deathless order of that sacred space. And you know what else this changes? Our whole idea of atonement. It wasn't about a judge pardoning a criminal. The Hebrew word literally means to cover. So atonement was more like a ritual cleansing, a spiritual decontamination process. It wiped away the ritual impurity so a person could be restored to a pure state and safely get close to the sacred again. But here's the thing about this whole system, all of it, built around one single physical place. It was never meant to last forever. It was a lesson. And over centuries, you can watch this dramatic theological shift happen, away from a sacred place and toward a sacred person. You can actually see this journey play out over centuries. It starts with a portable tent, the tabernacle, where God's presence is localized, but it's on the move. Then Solomon's temple makes that presence permanent in Jerusalem. But then the temple gets destroyed in 586 BCE. That creates a huge crisis, and suddenly God's presence is unlocalized. And finally, Jesus' ministry represents the ultimate shift. The divine presence becomes personified, walking around in a human being.
And that moment, the destruction of the temple, man, that was a crisis of epic proportions. With the divine reactor gone, the entire system just collapses. How could they atone for impurity? How could they even approach God? This crisis forced this profound, game-changing realization. Maybe God's presence was never really contained by walls in the first place. And that's the exact context you need to understand what Jesus was doing. When he touches people with diseases, or when he tells people their sins are forgiven, and he's miles away from the temple, he's not just breaking rules for the sake of it. He's demonstrating that the very source of holiness and purity is no longer stuck in one location. It's now present and active in him. So, what does all this mean for us today? Well, this ancient map of sacred space, it wasn't just tossed in the garbage. It was fulfilled. Its whole purpose was completed. You know, like a training program that had finally reached its goal? Look, if you take away just one thing, let it be this simple shift. The old system managed your access to God through geography and your ritual state. Are you in the right place? Are you ritually pure? The new reality grounds access in allegiance, in loyalty and trust in a person. The question isn't where do I go anymore, it's who do I follow? And this really gets to the heart of the whole matter. The entire elaborate system of temples and rules and sacrifices, it was pedagogical. It was a teaching tool. It was designed to train humanity over a long period of time to take God's presence seriously, to get that it is both wonderful and incredibly dangerous.
And that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? If the dwelling place of God is no longer a building you have to visit, but something you access through allegiance, well, what does worship even mean now? What does it mean for us to live a sacred life right here, right now? Rethinking that question, that's the real legacy of this ancient blueprint.